Welcome friends to Living Large on Little. I'm Beth Stevenson. Today we're going to make some absolutely fantastic, my most requested sweet roll recipe. So it's going to be, we're going to make both orange rolls and cinnamon rolls out of the same batch of dough. It's easy to do, and here we go. The first thing I'm going to start with is 4 cups of warm water. This water is the temperature that you would bathe the baby in, so it's not hot, but it's nice and warm. I'm going to add 2 tablespoons of active dry yeast. I get my yeast in this kind of a package. I will link it on the website, so in case you want to do a volume of it. And with Christmas coming up, you probably do want to do a volume of it because these are so good. You're going to want to give them to all your friends, only the people you love the most. So I'm going to add the yeast into the water, and then I'm going to add 3/4 of a cup of sugar. And that is going to proof a little bit. I'm going to mix it in. And then I'm going to just set that aside for just a second. It really doesn't need to proof because it's really good yeast, and I already know that. But I want to soak the raisins. It's kind of important when you're making cinnamon raisin rolls to soak the raisins in warm water first. Whoops. I only wanted the stuff that was loose on top. To soak them in warm water first, because otherwise they can kind of burn and get dry and crunchy, and that isn't what you want. You want them nice and moist and chewy. And so you soak them while you're doing the rest of the dough, and that way they'll be nice and soft and moist. Okay, so this yeast is already dissolved enough that we can proceed. I'll put the raisins out of the way, and I'm going to add the 2 tablespoons of salt and 4 eggs. And then I'm going to whisk those in. Just break up the yolks a little bit. Get those whites kind of distributed. I'm going to add a 1.5 cups of, oh no, this is just 1 cup. Sorry about that. 1 cup of mashed potato flakes. Those are just regular instant potatoes. Nothing fancy or special about them. For the flavor, I'm going to add 1 cup of dry powdered milk. If you don't have powdered milk on hand, you can use regular milk instead of the water and just warm it up before you do it, before you start the recipe. Warm it in the microwave. There's no special trick to that. Just get it all warm. So there are a couple of extra things that we're going to add at this point that you might not have thought of. This is 1/3 cup of oil. And then this is sort of a special ingredient. This is vital wheat gluten, and that's because I'm using all-purpose flour. If I was using bread flour, I wouldn't need to use the vital wheat gluten, but because they've already added it. But you can buy this in the grocery store. You can buy it online on Amazon. I will link that one also because it's a little bit of an unusual ingredient. All this is wheat protein, and it makes the bread, or the rolls in this case, have a nicer consistency. It has very little flavor of its own. Just kind of a floury taste. So once that's all incorporated, I'm going to add 4 cups of flour. This is, as I said, just all-purpose flour. And get that incorporated in. That's going to form a nice batter. Now this stage where I am mixing it is really all the kneading that you're going to do with this. You don't want to overwork roll dough. Bread dough, you knead it a little bit, you agitate it to get a nice consistency and a nice texture in the bread. But with rolls, you want them to be super tender. Now the potatoes will help with that. They'll keep them really nice and moist. And the eggs also will help with the structure. for the rolls, but you don't want to overdo it. So you can see this is a very thick batter. So from this stage, you want to add the dough 1 cup at a time. So I've got my flour in a bucket down here so I can do it readily. The potatoes actually add quite a bit of, or they absorb a lot of the liquid, and so this is a lot thicker than it would be had you not added the potatoes. You're observing that I'm not measuring this carefully because you really go on consistency. After you've added the first 4 cups, you know you're going to add at least 2 more cups, probably closer to 3 more altogether to get a very sticky dough consistency. And roll dough can be much stickier than bread dough. Bread dough, you want it a little bit drier and more elastic and springy. But this is still pretty wet. That's about 1.5 cups more. So we're up to about 3.5 additional cups. And I think that this is going to be just right. So that's a total of 7.5 cups of flour, not counting the 1/3 cup of vital wheat gluten that we put in there. So I'm going to mix this with my hands now. Until this flour is all nice and incorporated, and I'll come back to you as soon as that's at that point. Okay, so this is getting really close to being the right consistency. It is still sticky, but it is gathering together in the bowl. So I'm going to sprinkle it with flour. I've got about another 1/3 cup in this little cup, and just sort of agitate the ball of dough, turn it over so that it's completely coated in this extra little bit of flour, and you can see how it's holding together now. And I know it's real sticky in the middle, but that's okay. As soon as it makes kind of a smooth ball, I might sprinkle a little more flour on it. But this looks pretty good. This looks about right. It's not quite smooth enough yet. I'm going to scrape the extra dough off the sides and the bottom. Add a little bit more. Alright, so peel it off my hands. Now I'm going to just put a tad. So this is about a teaspoon of oil, and I'm going to rub it on the top of this dough, and then I'm going to flip it over. Now this dough does not really need 2 rises. It's going to be just fine with just a rest in between. So I'm going to let it sit for about 1/2 hour, and then I'll come back to it and form the rolls. I'm going to cover it with a damp dishcloth in the meantime so it doesn't dry out. And then as soon as I'm ready to form them, I'll come back to you. Alright, this has been sitting for 1/2 hour. It has risen quite a bit, but it's ready to form up into our lovely sweet rolls. So I'm going to dump it out onto a clean floured surface. Cut this dough in half. Doesn't have to be precisely. So flour it up top and bottom. Kind of stretch it into a little bit of an oblong shape. Maybe this is kind of in the way. And then just kind of roll it into about an 18-inch long slab of dough, and Try to get it fairly rectangular. That needs a little bit of extra flour right there, obviously. I'm going to patch that together. Sprinkle a little bit of flour on there. All right, now I think I'll do the orange rolls first. So the first thing to do is to zest the orange. Now the zest on an orange is this orange part that's in the peel. And that's actually what gives it the orangey flavor. So I'm just going to use a fine grater and grate that off. And I want to get as much as I can off of this orange. Okay, you can turn that off. So this orange is pretty well denuded of its orange outer peel. It rendered about 1/4 of a cup of orange zest. And this is 3/4 of a cup of sugar. So I'm going to mix that white sugar with this orange zest. And that is going to be the basis for the flavoring of these rolls. Okay, before I put the orange zest out there, I'm going to put 1/4 of a cup of melted butter. In other words, 1/2 stick. Cut that. Here's the melted butter. Just going to pour it out and spread it liberally on this dough. That is for flavor and texture. Then sprinkle out this sugary zest evenly over the dough. And everyone that is going to be partaking of these rolls today is a fan of cranberries, sweet dried cranberries like craisins. And so I am going to add some of those to these orange rolls to make them absolutely spectacular. I love craisins, and so I'm going to use a lot of them. These are not actually Craisin brand. I buy these in bulk at the grocery store. Now, we've got the dough all flavored up and ready to go. I'm going to roll it lengthwise into a nice tidy little log. Kind of spread out those craisins a little bit. It still wants to stick to my counter. I could have been a little more careful about getting the flour completely covering the counter. But I don't want too much flour getting into the rolls themselves, so where it's kind of thick, I'm going to brush it off back onto the counter. And then pinch it on this edge so that it is not going to spill its contents. Now, here's a cookie sheet. Spray the cookie sheet. My hands are slippery because of that butter, and so I'm having a hard time pressing that button. Okay, now you're going to cut this, get the extra flour out of the way. Cut this into 1-inch slices and then put them face down, or put them with the rolled side up on a cookie sheet. Okay, so I've finished with the setting the orange rolls. Now I'm going to do the cinnamon rolls. And so I'm rubbing the generous slather of butter on this dough, melted butter. You can use margarine, of course butter is a little more flavorful. And now these raisins are all plump and soaked and moist, so I'm going to go ahead and drain off the water. So the raisins are drained. This is just plain ground cinnamon. There's no sugar in this part. And I am going to be really liberal with this cinnamon, because I find that it's the cinnamon more than the sugar that really amps up the flavor in this recipe. So a lot of cinnamon goes onto this till it's completely covered. You don't want any dry patches like that, so you kind of brush them into the wet areas. Then this is a half a cup. This is a half a cup of sugar, plain white sugar. If you want to have fun, you can do the butter and then spread it with brown sugar, and it makes kind of a caramel roll, and you can add some nuts if you want to. That's really, really good. Caramel nut rolls. You can add nuts to this cinnamon raisin recipe too, and that is quite delectable. This is a recipe I have been making for probably 25 or 30 years, and it is my most requested recipe. Everyone that I have shared them with has wanted to duplicate this for themselves, and so now it'll be out there for everyone. Now you're just going to tuck this edge around to form the middle of the roll. Simple as it can be. I think we got any raisins down here. I'm going to pull some of them over. I'm just using this little scraping tool that I bought at the dollar store. Doesn't need to be fancy, but it works quite nicely with dough. Okay, so now we can go ahead and cut these into generous inch. They're probably 1.25 inches widths of rolls. You can use a string, wrap it around it like a piece of dental floss, and cut these if you want them perfectly round, but you can kind of reshape them once you set them on the pan anyway, so I don't feel like it's really necessary. Grease your pan with pan spray, and then set these out. This is going to be enough that it will more than fill this pan, so I'm going to also spray a little square cake pan and let those rise separately. After they're at this stage, you're going to set them aside and let them rise for about, well, until they're about triple. And so it depends on how warm the place you put them is, how long that's going to take, but I imagine it takes about an hour in a warm place. And then you bake them in the oven, but when we get to that point, I will come back to you. These cinnamon rolls are ahead of the orange rolls, and they are ready to go in the oven. So I preheated my oven to 375 degrees, and I'm going to pop these in. They'll take about 18 minutes, but I'm going to check them after 15. So here we go. So these cinnamon raisin rolls are out of the oven. I overbaked them just a little bit. They only took 15 minutes. I've got 3 cups of powdered sugar in this bowl. I'm going to add 2 tablespoons of butter. More butter into this recipe. This is not a low-calorie recipe, as you've already figured out. And a swig of milk, and about 2 capfuls of vanilla. This is my favorite Mexican vanilla that is rich and delicious, and it costs about $10 for this bottle. It's really, really good stuff. I buy it online at Amazon or off of eBay, one of the two. So I'm going to stir this up, and the vanilla is dark, so it's going to make it kind of a tan color. Just you want it kind of runny, so that's too thick, but I want to stir it all in before I add a little bit more milk. It's not going to make a ton, but the cinnamon rolls have plenty of sugar and flavor in them, so they don't need a ton of frosting added on top. And this is only for the cinnamon rolls. This is not for the orange rolls. The orange rolls, I make a little, the frosting is a different recipe. So I'll show you that in a minute. So that is just perfect. It's semi-liquid, but I can just drizzle it over the top of the cinnamon rolls and make them look just so good. And it'll add just that extra element of sweetness that they need. A spoon might be easier than using the whisk though. So kind of spread them on. When these are cool enough to tear apart, which will be about 15 minutes, I am going to show you what they look like on the inside. But these are still completely hot. I just barely pulled these out of the oven. So here's the frosting for the orange rolls. I've got 3 cups of powdered sugar in here. I'm going to add the vanilla the same as I did with the cinnamon roll ones. Just a couple of capfuls. That is plenty. And that is 2 tablespoons of butter. Stir that in just a little bit. Now, instead of using milk, I'm going to use orange juice concentrate. And that's going to really zip up that the orangey, citrusy flavor in the orange rolls, in the frosting. So I'll blend that in until it is completely done, completely incorporated. And then I'm going to add just a tad of water to make it a little bit liquid so I can drizzle it. Right now it's way too thick to drizzle, and you want it drizzling consistency. In fact, I could even probably add just a little bit more orange juice concentrate to get it to the right consistency. All right, a little bit thinner is going to be better. These are going to have a very strong orange flavor. You can see that my oven is not baking very evenly today for some reason, and it is, these are a little bit overcooked. The ones on the back are anyway. These are still hot, so they will melt this frosting down a little bit. I'm going to just spread it like that. Okay, go ahead and turn it off, Thomas.
Been really cool, really nice, you know, and it would be, I would feel really bad to be like, you know, when I know them all well, and like my manager, everyone